My name is Dwayne Pontratz. I'm a solutions architect at ORock Technologies. We will be creating an instance using OpenStack command line tool. By the end of this video, you will have an instance you can connect to. To create and access a compute instance, we need a few things. We need an internal network to connect it to, a security group to create firewall rules, a router to route traffic, a volume for block storage, a floating IP address to access our instance, a public SSH key so we can access it, and the instance itself. The first screen we see is the logon screen. Enter your domain, username, and password. See your sales representative to get this information. Click Connect to continue. The first thing we see is our friendly overview screen showing what resources we have used and what is available. The first thing we need to do is get our access script. Click on Project, then API Access. We now see our API Access screen. We want to download our OpenStack RC file. Click the Download dropdown, then OpenStack RC file. Let's switch to a command prompt and take a look at the file. This file is a script containing information for connecting to the ORock Cloud OpenStack APIs. It exports variables that the OpenStack script needs. We need to source the file to get the variables into our environment. It asks us for our password. Enter in your password that you use to log on to the GUI. Next is to install the OpenStack scripts. I'm on an Ubuntu box and there is a package for the scripts. It's a Python script. It's called Python 3-OpenStack client. Since I previously installed the script, it did not install anything new. The command we use is OpenStack. You can get help with any commands by typing OpenStack -help or OpenStack subcommand -help. I also like to use bash completion, so I will create the bash completion file. I've saved these commands in a file for this video so we don't have to watch me type. Let me get them open now and add bash completion for the OpenStack command. The first thing we need to do is create our internal network. An internal network can be thought of as a simple switch or a network layer 2 device in the OSI model. The subcommand we will use for this is network. Let's look at OpenStack network create --help. It's hard to see the information because of my screen size, so let's pipe the output to less and scroll through it. The help output gives us information on switches that we can use. I only need the name for this network. The rest is the default values. We will give our network the name of Wordpress. We see what looks like a bunch of characters on the screen. This is information on what was created. It is badly formatted boxes because the lines are wrapped. Next, we need to create a subnet. We will use OpenStack subnet create command to create the subnet. I'm going to use a few more switches to create the subnet. The order of the switches usually doesn't matter. First is the name WordPress_subnet. Second is the network, which is WordPress that we just created. Third is the subnet range. We use IP version 4 addresses. The network is defined using CIDR format. We could use any IP version 4 addresses we like, but the best practice is to use a private address range. We're going to use 192.168.102.0/24. If you don't know what this means, take some time to look up CIDR and IP version 4 private address ranges. The fourth is IP version. We are using IP version 4. Fifth is the allocation pool. This is the range of addresses our DHCP server will allocate. You need to give it a start and an end. I'm going to use 100 addresses starting with 101. Sixth is DHCP. This tells OpenStack that we want a DHCP server. Last is DNS name server. This is our DNS name server that we want to use. I'm going to use 8.8.8.8. The next thing we want to do is create a router so we can route traffic through the networks. We will use the command router create to do this with the name of WordPress_router. Then we set the external gateway for our router using the command router set with the external gateway switch and the external network of the external floating IPs. Lastly, we will add our subnet to the router with the router add subnet command. Order matters on this command. The router is first, then the subnet we want to add, which is WordPress_router, then WordPress_subnet. Now we're going to add our SSH key pair to OpenStack. Key pairs are injected into the operating system when it boots for the first time. This allows you to access the system with SSH. To do this, we're going to use the subcommand key pair create. We give the key pair a name, Dwayne, then tell OpenStack that it's a public key, and finally point it to our public key. Now we want to set up our volume for the instance. We're going to use two commands here. One to get the image we want to base the volume on, and one to create the volume. Images are based on operating system images. Let's list the image with OpenStack image list. I'm going to use CentOS7 image, so I want to get its ID. Next, we're going to use OpenStack volume to create the image. We're going to create a bootable 25 GB image based on our CentOS7 image. Now let's create the image with volume create with the name of WordPress_volume, using a switch of image and giving it our CentOS7 ID, telling OpenStack it's bootable with the bootable switch, and telling it a size of 25 GB with the size switch. Now we want to set up our security group. Security groups are firewall rules. Let's start by creating a security group with the security group create command with the name of WordPress_sec group. This will create the security group as well as add default rules to allow all egress traffic out. We will need to create some ingress rules to allow us to connect to the instance. We want to allow SSH and HTTP connections. Let's start with SSH. Using security group rule create, we will use the name of our security group, WordPress_sec group, with a switch of ingress to tell OpenStack that this will be incoming traffic, with a switch of either type of IP version 4. Then we want to tell it what IPs will be accepted with remote IP. We want to allow all traffic in, so we'll use a CIDR of 0.0.0.0/0. With the switch of protocol, we tell it the traffic will be TCP. And finally, DES port of 22, which is the network port of SSH. Now for HTTP. We'll use all the same switches as SSH, but change the port to 80, which is the network port for HTTP. We're almost ready to create our instance. We need to get the flavor that we want to use. Flavors are the amount of CPU and RAM we want to use for the instance. We can use flavor lists to list the available flavors. We're going to use m1.tiny. We are now ready to create our instance. We will use server create with the name of WordPress. With the switch of volume, we'll tell it we want to use WordPress_volume. With the switch of flavor, we will tell it we want to use m1.tiny. With the switch of key name, we'll tell it we want to use our SSH key of Dwayne. With the switch of network, we'll tell it we want to use our WordPress network. With the switch of security group, we tell it we want to use WordPress_sec group. The last thing we need to do is associate an external IP address to our instance so we can connect to it. We're going to use the floating IP create command. I'm going to add some extra switches to give me just the IP address. The command is floating IP create external floating IP, which is our external network. F value tells us we want the output format to be the value. C floating IP address tells us we want the IP address column. Now I want to copy the IP address so I can assign it to the instance. We will use the server add command to add it to the instance. Server add floating IP, Wordpress, the name of our instance, then IP. Let's try and connect to the instance, but we don't know what the username is. How do we find out? It really depends on the operating system and image we use. You can look for this information on the internet. One trick is to try and connect as root. Most of the images will tell you a username other than root to use. Let's SSH to the machine using root and see what happens. You can see it tells us to use the user CentOS rather than root. So let's log on as CentOS. You're now connected to the machine and can make configuration changes as you like. As you probably guessed, I'm going to install WordPress. You can find the information on how to install WordPress on the internet. Let's go and check out our WordPress instance. Success! We have WordPress running. This has been an overview of creating an instance using the command line. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching. My name is Dwayne Paretz. Please contact us for more information or see some of our other videos.